All right, y'all. Draft Dad's here with the new set. Kaldheim's just about to launch here shortly on Arena. Super pumped to be able to play with some new cards, new mechanics. Looks like a sweet one. Let's hop right in. First thing I want to talk about are the major mechanics in the set. Returning mechanic is going to be Snow. That was seen in Cold Snap, and I think it was also in Modern Horizons as well. Modern Horizons didn't come to Arena, but that was on Moto. Snow is a very powerful mechanic if you can get the cards for it. I think in this set it's very flexible, opens up a lot of options. All the colors except for white get into this. So an example here, one of the 3 wraths in the set. There's 3 different wrath effects in this set at rare. But this one allows you to wrath the board, kill all the creatures, and then return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield where X is the amount of snow mana spent to cast a spell. So if you're a snow deck, I mean, you're going to put this in any black control deck, right? But if you're a snow deck and you got 4 snow lands out, when you do this, you can get your 4-drop back. Like a very, very good, efficient wrath for the cost. So super pumped about being able to play with these snow cards and build that 5-color snow deck. We'll get into all that later. New mechanic is Foretell. This is kind of... It reminds me a little bit of Suspend and also kind of Morph. What this does is you pay 2 mana, exile this card from your hand, goes face down, opponent can't see what it is, and then you can play it at a later turn for its Foretell cost. So what we have here is a Hunt the Weak effect, 4 mana, +1/+1 counter on your creature, you get to fight another one. And you can foretell it for a single green mana. Super cheap. This allows for very cheap interaction. A lot of really dangerous, efficient, instant speed removal in this set. And so it actually devalues cards like Struggle for Skemfar, Combat Tricks for me, because of this, the vast quantity you can get of amazingly efficient instant speed interaction in this set. But Foretell is a mechanic. It's on every color. I think it's really cool. I think it opens up a lot of different interesting game states. And you're going to want to have a Foretold card on the field and exiled almost all the time just to play mind games with your opponent. The next mechanic is Boast. This is the aggressive mechanic in the set. So you can see here on Dragonkin Berserker, very good rare. It's got a Boast cost of 5 mana. So what you can do, as soon as you activate it or attack, declare this as an attacker, you can play the Boast cost. You can play it up until the end of the turn. When you play that Boast cost, you get the effect. Here, it makes a dragon, so I have no hesitancy running this dude into his certain death because I can get my dragon for 5 mana. But there's a lot of different creatures in every color but blue that have Boast. I think it's concentrated around white, black, and red, the Mardu colors, the aggressive colors. But this seems to be the aggro mechanic in this set. Of note, there is a weird push and pull. Aggressive decks tend to want to curve out. 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop. Paying a Boast cost means you can't pay for your 3-drop on turn 3, right? So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. You might have to skip a turn paying for Boast so you can play your 3-drop or your 4-drop or something like that. But we'll have to see how that develops. I think also with the Wraths in this set, there's 2 different versions of Pyroclasm at uncommon in this set. Could be tough for the aggro decks, but again, haven't played with the cards yet. We'll have to see how that goes. So, in the draft, Snowlands are the first thing that I wanted to call out. There's one in every pack. They can be a dual land like this one or a snow basic. I think that most decks, unless you're white, have ways to interact with snow, and so you'll want to take these. They remind me a lot of the gates in Ravnica, right? If you remember those sets where gates were important, there were cards that interacted with gates. Here, it's even more so. And what I think this does, I think this is a great decision. I think it opens up the draft for the table, right? Because you're going to have players, instead of taking that card that may or may not make their deck or may not fit in their archetype that they even want, they're going to take the Snowland because they know that's going to be valuable, and then pass that card, that maybe playable card, to the next person down the line who might really need it for their deck. So it's going to make decks a lot better, I think, by introducing something into that land slot that people actually want. So I think this is a great decision, and I think you should be taking these pretty highly if you're going to be doing anything with snow. I think having between 6 and at least 6 snowlands in your deck if you want to be a snow deck is going to be required. So the other thing is set up or go nuts. And this card is kind of an example of the push and pull of Kaldheim, right? Because you have a 3 mana 3/2, which would typically be a more kind of aggressive creature. But there's incidental life gain on this, and it has a foretell cost of 1. So what you can do is you can choose in the draft if you want to be this slow kind of set up my foretell cards, overwhelm my opponent with mana evasion or mana advantage, mana efficiency, card efficiency, have these cheap foretell things. And then you can get some incidental life gain by casting your second spell every turn, so you can set up your board with foretell cards and then just unleash a bunch of cheap stuff on them. Or you can go nuts, right? You can build an aggro deck, I think, in red, black. I think red-white has a good aggressive deck in it with boast creatures, equipment, auras, that type of thing. So you really have to make that distinction in the draft. And I think colors like red, which I think is quite good in this set, are able to do both of those. And players at the table, depending on what version of red they're in, are going to value those cards differently, and you're going to each end up with a good red deck. Whether you're a splashy snow red-green deck or a very aggressive red-black deck. The other thing in the draft you're going to pay attention to is the vast amount of instant interaction in this set. And right here is the Boomerang variant, foretell cost of just 1 blue mana, instant speed. And blue has 3 removal spells in this set, if you include this one. This one isn't removal, but it's bounce, right? But it does interact to save your creatures from removal. If your opponent plays a trick on their creature in combat to win, you can bounce their creature, and you can do it very cheaply. It makes attacking into open mana, even just 1 open mana, very dangerous. Very dangerous in this set. And so that's something to be aware of when you're in the draft, that you stock up on this cheap instant interaction. And then you try to have a foretell card kind of in exile just for the threat of it, even if it's not that instant speed interaction. I think it's a good idea. All right, so mechanics breakdown. Foretell, every color is going to get it, all 5 of them. Here you can see the 2 mana counter spell in foretell that blue gets at uncommon, which I think is a pretty good playable in limited. Also, snow, I think, is the second most populous mechanic. Everything but white really gets a lot of snow stuff, but you're going to want to have a critical mass between snowlands and snow permanents and things that care about those things, right? So Hailstorm Valkyrie here, great uncommon if you have 6 to 8 snowlands in your deck, right? If you can activate this thing twice, I think you're doing it. On the other hand, if you can't activate it, it's just not very good. A 2/2 flying for 4, the trample isn't really relevant, right? The next one up is Changeling and Tribal. So Tribal is something that all the colors are going to get, right? So in red, you have Berserkers. In blue-red, there's Wizards. Sorry, in red-black, there's Berserkers. Then you have Wizards. There's Elf Tribal in green-black. But Changelings fit in with all of it. And there's a lot of cards in this set that care about tribes, especially in blue-red. And blue has a couple very, very good Changelings. So I think these cards really just fit in to a lot of different decks. They make blue and green very flexible, and they excel in a lot of different situations. So I think that's something also to watch out for. And pick those Changelings higher than you normally would think, because they tend to be better than you think they are. Boast. This is the aggro mechanic that we talked about. So there's also a go wide strategy, I think, with white and green especially, and then also to a lesser extent in the green-black Elves deck, which tends to be a little bit more controlling. But these boast mechanics tend to be concentrated in black, red, and white. There's a very good one at common in green, of course. But you're not going to see any of these in blue that I can remember. There's not as many in green, and they tend to work best in those aggro Mardu colors. Last up is equipment/aura. So they've tinkered with equipment again, and the equipment in this set in most cases comes down with a creature attached to it. which is very good. There's one in black, there's one in red, and there's one in white that are attached to creatures. But the red-white deck really cares about those equipment cards. You'll see later when we go over this archetype just how that all plays out, and I think it can be a very strong deck. And there's also these ruins here that interact with a really cool card called Ruined Crown. And also they can attach to, or you can enchant a creature, you can enchant your equipment, which is usually better, and they replace themselves. So there's one in every color, add uncommon. But I think the ones that you are going to look out for, the best ones, are the white and the green one. All right, so color rankings. Wanted to do this real quick. Again, preliminary stuff. This will change, I'm sure, once we get a chance to play with the cards. But up at the top, I have blue. And that's on their standout 3 commons that we'll get into. I think they're just head and shoulders. The power level of those 3 commons, I think, on average, is just better than the other colors. You get a lot of great card advantage. Blue actually gets a decent removal suite. Now it's nothing compared to black or red in this set, but it's actually pretty good. I think it's better than greens with their fight effects, and I think it might even be better than white in this set. So it's also buoyed by the changeling synergies that we went over, a couple of really strong creatures at common. So I think blue is going to get my nod for the best color in the set. Up next is red, and that's built on its incredible instant speed removal spells. Very cheap if you're in the right deck. Very strong. I think the best common in the set is going to be Demon Bolt for me, which is 3 mana, instant speed, deal 4 to a creature or planeswalker, and has a foretell cost of 1 red mana. So incredibly undercosted, incredibly powerful. It also has flexible options. Red-green, red-blue tend to be slower decks built on giants or splashing or snow. And then you have also the aggressive red-black, red-white decks. And they all work well. And so I think what it does is it makes the color very deep. Where if you're in red-green and the person to your right is in red-white, other than that, obviously great removal, you're going to want different common creatures, and you're going to be able to have a good deck either way. So I do think it's very deep, very flexible. Up next is black, and this is purely on the strength of its removal. In this set, again, it's early, but I do believe that it has role-player creatures that work well, especially on the elf side. It has some very strong build-around uncommons that I really like. In that elf deck. It also has great recursion. There's a 2-mana instant speed, pull 2 cards out of the graveyard spell. So I think that's very strong in a set where types matter. You can get your changeling out and your elf in your green-black deck. So a lot of good stuff in black as well. Next up is green, and that is built on the strength of its 3 common creatures that I think are really powerful. It also has good synergy for splashing with changeling, so it's a very flexible color that can splash around, get a bunch of snow permanents, and has stuff that cares about snow. So I think green is up next. And then lastly, it's going to be white, and this is mainly because they missed the boat on snow. I think it really has very strong creatures across the board, across the converted mana cost spectrum from 1 to 5 at common. That are just great. It has a 5-drop called Master Scald that can get you your sagas back from the graveyard, which is really strong. 4/4 on a 5-drop, which isn't bad stats. And it has great aggressive creatures and good boast creatures too. So I don't think any of the colors here are massively underpowered. And I think all the colors definitely have decks that can be good. I think white-green might be in an awkward spot. We'll have to see how that develops, but all the colors here are strong, but you got to give an order to them, right? All right. Up next, let's get into the colors themselves. So white tends to be more aggro, as you can see here in Usher of the Fallen. It's a 2/1 for 1, which is already good in an aggro deck. But its boast ability creates a 1/1 white human warrior creature token. So if you're on the play, you're going to be able to get in there a turn 1, and you're going to get your 1/1 white token. And then all of a sudden you have 3 power of stats on turn 2. So I think this card can get out of hand, especially with the amount of tricks that white has, different equipment synergies. So this card can just run over your opponent or start that train, right? Up next, they're Mythic Uncommon. I like to do these Mythic Uncommons in each set. And this is just the most blanket, powerful common, I think, in the color that goes into any deck. And we'll talk about archetypes later, of course. But Shepard of the Cosmos is just going to go anywhere. It's a 3/3 flyer with a foretell cost of 4. So you can play this on turn 4, and you get your any permanent with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard back to the battlefield. And so if you have any of these lands that you sacrifice for an effect, which we'll get to, you can bring that back. Or you can bring your 2-drop back. Or you can bring your Usher of the Fallen back. Or you can bring your Ruin back, Ruin of Sustenance. There's equipment you can get back. So there's a lot of different options for this, and you can do it on turn 4. All right, you can have a 3/3 flyer and add your 2-drop back. It can be backbreaking for your opponent if they're not prepared. And then a build around. I think Clarion Spirit. Getting this back with Shepard is also pretty busted. But whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. Well, what Foretell does is it lowers the cost of casting your spells, so you are able to cast 2 more often in a turn. In addition, white is full, chock full, of cheap creatures, so you're going to be able to cast 2 at a time. The only thing you got to worry about is running out of gas. And the white-black deck in this format is that double spell deck, and we can talk about that and how you're going to get more cards into your hand as soon as we get over to that deck. All right. Top commons, Bounding Gold. This is the Arrest variant, or the Pacify variant. But I think it's, it's objectively the strongest Arrest variant because it can enchant any permanent vehicle. You can enchant, there's an Icy Manipulator in this set in blue, and you can enchant that, and then they can't tap your creatures down. Or you can just put it on a creature, and they can't attack, block, crew vehicles, can't activate their abilities. Just a decent removal spell here. It suffers from the effects of, leaving that permanent on the battlefield, especially in a tribal set where sometimes types matter, but still very strong. Up next at common, Stalwart Valkyrie. 4 mana for a 3/2 flyer is already pretty good. Snapping Drake is good. But there's another sub-theme in this set where you can exile a creature from your graveyard, and you get an extra effect, an extra bonus. And this is White's version of that, where you can just pay 2 mana. Exile a creature card from your graveyard rather than pay the full 4. And then you can pay 2 mana to cast this spell. So 2 mana, 3/2 flyer, very efficient, very strong. There's a lot of different play patterns where your 2-drop trades, and then you can just play this on turn 3, and you can play a 1-drop or foretell something or whatever you got to do. So, very strong card. Up next is Iron Verdict, and this is for the white-blue foretell deck, I think. It's very strong in white-black as well, but it deals 5 damage to target tap creature for a foretell cost of 1 at instant speed. So, very strong, kills just about anything as soon as it turns sideways. And I'm going to put that at the number 3 top common in white. There's other options. White gets a lot of good 2-drops and stuff like that. That may replace Iron Verdict depending on your deck type if you're more aggressive. But in general, I think Iron Verdict is going to be a higher pick. All right, next up, blue. Blue is all about card advantage. Pretty typical stuff. White is aggro, white weenie, and then you have blue card advantage, right? Typical. Glimpse of the Cosmos I chose here, which is very good, very cool to use in a Giants deck because you can cast it twice. Normally an Anticipate type effect like this one, 2 mana. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 in your hand, rest on the bottom in any order. Not so great, barely playable. Maybe your 23rd card in your 40-card draft deck, but you can use this in your graveyard as long as you control a Giant. Or a Changeling, which blue has, a ton of Changelings. And just for 1 mana, you can do the same effect, at which point this card becomes insane. Essentially, it reads, look at the top 3 cards of your library, choose the best one, then do it again later whenever you want for a single blue. That's awesome. I think that's really cool. Mythic Uncommon, I got to choose the Icy, right? If you have, I would run this card if I had 3, starting at 3 Snowlands, or 3 ways to generate snow mana, I think is when it becomes playable. Obviously, it's still pretty sketchy if you draw this without drawing your snow producing land, but having an Icy Manipulator for cheaper, it's 1 mana cheaper, is good. It's really good. Icy Manipulator is a good card. It doesn't tap lands, to note, which is strong with Icy Manipulator, tapping your opponent's splash color or something during their upkeep. before they can, spend their mana for their turn on their spells is very strong. But still, Icy is Icy. It's blue removal, essentially. So I think it's their Mythic Uncommon. I think it's great. And then a build around Frost Augur. I love this card. It essentially, if you get there on snow and you have a shit ton of snow permanents, right, like Icebind Pillar, this can read tap a snow, and this card draw a card for a 1-mana 1/2, and it becomes something your opponent has to get off the battlefield. And for anyone to spend a removal on your 1-drop is good for you, right? Because you're almost always coming out ahead on mana efficiency. I would say you're always coming out ahead. It's a good top deck late as well. You can look at the top card of your library. It's not like you're putting it on the bottom if it's not snow. So you still get it even if it isn't a snow permanent. But if it is, you just draw a card. And it can be your land, it can be your Icebind Pillar, your snow land, anything. So, awesome. Awesome build around, I think. All right, top commons. Behold the Multiverse. This is tough for me. Between these first two here. Behold the Multiverse is what I chose, though, because at instant, 4 mana, Scry 2, Draw 2 is already very good. It's already very good. Adding a Foretell cost of 2 kind of breaks this card open into insane. Like, I would play 4 of these in a blue deck. I think this card is so cheap to use for its Foretell cost. Having the threat of Foretell on the board is going to change the way my opponent plays when I have mana open. So I think you're getting an incredibly powerful effect for very cheap at common in blue. Glimpse of Genius was in Kaladesh Remastered. That was 4 mana at uncommon for this effect, and there was no other benefit. This is just strictly better because you can foretell this for cheaper. Next up, Augury Raven. Already a good card, 3/3 flyer for 4. It's a phantom monster, super playable, in limited, great creature. Decent stats flying, but foretell cost of 2 is really, again, what takes this thing over the top. You can play this on turn 3 and have a mana left over. So that's just incredible for Augury Raven here. And it's not a bad top deck late in the game because you're still getting a 3/3 flying body, which is pretty big in the air. So not much else to say about this other than it's just a fantastic creature at common for blue. Next up is Raven Form. I waffled on this one quite a bit. I think there's some other options, but just the fact that this is 1 blue mana in blue to exile an artifact or creature. So you can get rid of their icy, their bomb equipment, whatever it is, and it's exile. So there's nothing they can do to stop that. They do get a 1/1 blue bird token. But if you're looking at the second top common in Augury Raven, you shouldn't have too much difficulty dealing with a 1/1 blue bird, 1/1 flyer if you're in blue. Blue also gets a great changeling flying card for 3 mana called Mistwalker at common. It's a 1/4 flyer that pumps itself, and it's changeling. And I think that's an auto-include in just about any blue deck as well. So I don't think you're going to have problems with that 1/1 blue bird for this. And it's just so cheap and so efficient, and it's not an effect that blue gets very often. So I think it's very strong. All right, up next, black. Black typically is control. I think that's mostly what it's built around. There are some aggressive decks it can get into in red-black, but I think those are more the exception. Generally, it's a control deck built upon the strength of its removal, which is crazy in this set. Poison the Cup is murder with upside. All right, you can foretell this for 2. If you do and use it to kill a creature that way, you also scry 2. How good is that? Or if you just draw it and you need something dead, it's a 3 mana kill a thing at instant speed. Doesn't get better. So Poison the Cup, I think one of the best uncommons in the set. I think there's a gold uncommon that we'll get to that's a little better, but this is if you see this in your first pack, just take it. Just take it. You can't go wrong. The mythic uncommon has to be different, of course. I couldn't. It's Poison the Cup, but I had to pick something different here. So I chose Vengeful Reaper just because it goes into every black deck. It's not on the same level as Poison the Cup, but Vengeful Reaper is just a flexible flyer, flying death touch haste, 2/3 for 4 mana with a foretell of 2. And so you're just going to take this and slot it into as many as you can get. You're going to take them and slot them into any black deck. Good on defense because death touch and flying. And it's got, 3 toughness. It's also good on offense. So, just a great card. Has haste. I mean, haste seems kind of tacked down, but whatever. And then a build around. This is my little pet card here. This is in the Elves deck, or if you got a ton of Changelings. Could also work in the Zombies deck, maybe. When it comes into play, you can either have your opponent lose X life, or you can gain X life, where X is the greatest number of creatures of creature type that you have in common. So the Elves deck wants to make a bunch of elf tokens as well. So I can see this thing hitting for 6-7 damage, right? And there's tons of ways in black-green to recur this type of card. So you can do this over and over again. In addition, it's 4 mana for a 2/5. That's a lot of toughness. That's a lot of toughness. Even in this format, when the removal's really good, in red has a tough time dealing with this. So I think it's a very strong card. Gives good reach late game for the Elves deck. I think a lot of games are going to end with a Skemfar Shadow Sage. All right, top comments. Feed the Serpent, number 1. This is the second exile effect. First one we talked about was Raven form, but these do exist at common in this format. You got to watch out for them. 4 mana, instant speed, exile target creature or planeswalker. There's going to be a lot of draft tables where this is the first pick in the pack one. Pick one, and you wouldn't be afraid to do it. It is not splashable, which is something to note. But 4 mana, instant, exile, get rid of something, never have to think about it again. Can't go wrong. Next up, I have Way Down. This is just built on its efficiency. 1 black mana. It is sorcery speed, to note. 1 black mana, target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. So there is an additional cost. We talked about this before with one of the white top commons, but you have to exile a creature card from your graveyard. So that can be annoying if you're trying to use this to deal with an aggressive deck and you don't have a creature in the yard yet. But in most cases, you're going to be able to do that no problem. And it's going to kill stuff even late into the game. So for a very, very cheap 1 black mana cost. So incredibly efficient, very powerful effect. Next up, this one I waffled on quite a bit, but I think Raise the Draugr is going to take this for me because it's 2 mana at instant speed. And usually this type of effect, think about Soul Salvage and Dominaria, or Dead Revels and Ravnica. Those are at sorcery speed. So what this allows you to do is at the end of your opponent's turn, you can pay this cost. You can get your 2 creatures back. You can get your elf and your changeling back, or your bomb and your changeling back, or your 2 elves, 2 zombies, whatever. Get them back in your hand and then play them the next turn. Normally when you have an effect like this, you spend mana to use the effect, and then you don't have enough mana to play both those cards back and put it back onto the battlefield. But this can kind of surprise your opponent out of nowhere because of its instant speed nature and its cheap cost, and you can play both those cards potentially on the same turn, or the following turn. So, like that one a lot. All right, we got red up next. Red, typically, very normally, is beatdown. The interesting thing here, I think, with red is that there's this aggressive, cheap creature beatdown, and then you also have giants on the other side that are beating people down. So I think red is very flexible in that way. And so wanted to highlight Dwarven Hammer here because this fits into both strategies, right? You make your little 2/1 Berserker for 5 mana. It's a 5/1 Trampler, which you got to deal with. It's going to deal you some damage. It's going to kill something. Or it's going to trade for a card. And then you have this to make all your little weenies into threats. +3/+0 in Trample is going to, for an equip cost of 3, that's just going to make every other little 2/1 you have into a threat. So I think that's very strong in the beatdown category for Dwarven Hammer. All right, the Mythic Uncommon, there's a bunch of different ways you can think about this, but I think Basalt Ravager in red-green or red-blue is going to be really strong. And that's because it deals X damage to any target. This can even go face to kill your opponent. So it's can be an upgraded Flame Tongue Kavu in that regard, especially if you got a lot of changelings and stuff. Right? But it deals X damage to any target where X is the greatest number of creatures you control that have a creature type in common. So if you got 4 giants on the battlefield, probably not going to happen because giants are expensive. But if you got a couple giants, a couple changelings, this can come down and deal 4 to any creature. It can blow up their creature, it can blow up their face. And what you're left with is a 4 mana 4/2, which isn't bad. It's not bad. It's going to trade with something or eat a removal spell. So I think that's very strong. And you're going to first pick a lot of these. And lastly is the build around. This is just a cheap creature here. There's not a whole... Red is pretty straightforward. But there's not a whole lot of build arounds in red. I chose Frenzied Raider, 2 mana. Whenever you activate a boast ability, put a +1/+1 counter on Frenzied Raider. One thing to note, you can activate boast abilities in instant speed. And then if you have multiple boast creatures, you can activate them both and then pump this thing up quite a bit. This can go from a 2/2 to a 4/4 real quick. So I think this thing can get out of hand pretty fast. You slap a Dwarven Hammer on this thing, and all of a sudden it has trample. It's big. It's a problem for a 2-drop. So it can get out of control, and it's only a 2-drop. It's 2/2 for 2. So it's already reasonably statted. It's all upside. All right, top commons. These are all removal spells. First up, Demon Bolt, my pick for the best common in the set. 4 damage, target creature or planeswalker, foretell cost of 1, instant speed, 3 mana. If you don't want to pay foretell, which is already very awesome. So it's just an amazing card. You're going to pick a lot of these first in your draft table. So if you don't open a bomb rare and you do open a Demon Bolt, chances are you're probably going to pick the Demon Bolt. So Frostbite up next. This is the shock variant. It doesn't go face, but deals 2 damage to target creature planeswalker. Snow instant, 1 red. If you control 3 or more snow permanents, deals 3 damage instead, which makes it hyper efficient removal. Right? That's lightning bolt level removal. Obviously doesn't go face, but 3 or more snow permanents isn't that difficult to accumulate if you're in red-green. Right? You can get your snow lands, of course, but there's also snow creatures, there's snow enchantments, snow artifacts, as we've seen in blue. So if thinking red-green and red-blue, you're going to have a pretty easy time getting this to hit for 3, which makes it very good late game as well. Last up is Squash. I think this is obviously going to be best in your red-blue giant deck or your red-green changeling type deck. But this is 5 mana, instant speed, deals 6 to a creature or planeswalker. So it's just going to kill whatever it touches. But it's only 2 mana if you control a giant, or changeling, of course, because they're also giants. That's 2 mana at instant speed. That is hyper efficient, blows up anything. So very strong. All of these are at common. All of these are instant speed. I think if you open a pack with all 3 of these in it, there's a good chance the first, second, and third pick out of that pack are all going to be red removal spells. So I think red, this is part of what makes red so strong in this format. All right, last color up is green. And so what I've chosen for that, it's very flexible, and it normally is with splashing and everything like that. So I have Spirit of the Alderguard here, which I think is a cool little bear, or maybe not so little if you have enough snow. But when you play it, it's 4 mana, and you can search your library for a snow land card, put it into your hand. So this can be your splash color, it could be your dual land, any snow land. And you essentially draws you that card. So it makes sure you hit your 5th land drop too. And then it gets this little bonus of +1/+0 for each other snow permanent you control. So this can get to be a 4/4, 5/4. It's already at bare minimum a 1/4 because it's found you your snow land card. And if you're snow and you have 6 permanents on the field, this thing is a real threat. All right? So I think this one's very good. Very flexible. Mythic Uncommon, I chose Boreal Outrider, another snow card. Whenever you cast a creature spell, if a snow of any of that spell's colors was spent to cast it, that creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So, one thing to note with this, it's free, right? You don't have to pay an extra snow mana to give it a +1/+1 counter. It just has to be one of the colored mana has to be a snow. So let's look at Spirit of the Alderguard here. Let's say I tap 4 snow forests to bring in Spirit of the Alderguard. It'll only get 1 +1/+1 counter on it because only one of the only forest mana was spent with snow. The colorless mana that was spent, snow mana was spent on, doesn't matter for Boreal Outrider. It has to be the colored part of that mana. All right, and then a build around. This one's kind of funny. Finn the Fangbear. This deck, maybe this comes together once a format, but 1/3 Death Touch for 2, which is mediocre. Defensive creature. Whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. Player with 10 or more poison counters loses the game. There is a Saga in black-green that gives all of your creatures Death Touch. And one day I will live the dream, and I'll have a shit ton of elf tokens with Death Touch. I will have that Saga out, and on the last turn, giving them all Death Touch, I will drop a Fin and kill my opponent. That is my goal for the format. So I think if this card is bad, you shouldn't draft it. But if it does come together, it's going to be sweet. All right, top commons. All of these are creatures in green, and that's part of what I think makes green a strong color. So, Seraph's Packmate, 4 mana, 3/3 draw a card. Already good, decent stats, replaces itself, gonna trade with something, leaves you up on cards. What makes this card amazing, maybe not amazing, but I think very, very strong, is the foretell cost. So you can pay the foretell on 2, play this thing on 3, draw a card, still have a mana left over for a trick or something. It's also a great top deck late game because 3/3 it's relevant stats, right? And it replaces itself, so it gets helps you to outpace your opponent when you're in that top deck war, right? Next up, I got Horizon Seeker. I think this card is very strong. We'll see. This is the boast creature I was talking about in green, but 3 mana, 3/2, which is fine, right? But boast for 2 mana. Search your library for a basic land card. That can be snow. That can be your snow land, right? Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So it ramps you. Well, not ramps you, but it fixes your mana. It enables your splash colors. It ensures you hit your land drops. It thins out your deck from lands, which may or may not be relevant in the grand scheme of things, but I think it does so much. And if it gets in more than once, this card is just amazing. If you're able to pay that boast cost more than once, incredible. Think about this play pattern here. All right, turn 2, I foretell my Seraph's Packmate. Turn 3, I play Horizon Seeker. Turn 4, I attack with Horizon Seeker, boast, and I can play the foretell cost of my Seraph's Packmate. That's amazing. I've drawn 3 cards that turn. 1 from boast from the land from the Horizon Seeker, 1 from my draw step, and 1 from the Seraph's Packmate. That seems awesome to me. So I have high hopes for this card. I hope it works out. But, who knows? We got to play with it first, right? All right, next up, I have Icehide Troll. If you're in the snow deck, I think this card can get out of hand. Why it's strong is it's good early and it's good late. Your opponent just can't block this thing late. And it's an amazing blocker late. They can't attack into it. If you have the 2 snow mana to pay to make it a 4/3 indestructible, that's incredible, especially for a 3 mana creature. So for me, this comes in third just because you have to be in snow and you have to be able to get that cost. There's also a shit ton of instant interaction that we've talked about, instant speed removal. So my opponent, if they have Demon Bolt or something, in response to me paying to make this indestructible, they can snipe it, right? And so that's kind of a feel-bad situation. But there's also some exile stuff that we talked about in Raven form. There was Feed the Serpent in black. So I think there's some ways around indestructibility in this set. But even so, this card's incredible. I think it's very strong. All right. Colorless. Did want to bring these up because there's a vehicle theme in this set. There's a minor equipment theme in this set. Just to talk quick about what some of the colorless cards can do. And I also want to talk a bit about that special little Snowland Evolving Wild style variant. But first up is Synergy. I think with Bloodline Pretender here, it's not a high pick. But if you have an extremely tight tribal deck going with a lot of changelings and stuff, this card can do some work, make your creatures a little bit stronger. There's another synergy piece in Ruined Crown, which is an equipment that when you cast it, you can pull a ruin from your deck, your hand, your graveyard, and attach it to Ruined Crown. It's also very synergistic and very efficient, and I'm really high on that card. And then you have vehicles. The vehicles don't seem that great. There's a rare one in green that I think is really good. But the ones at common aren't that great. I want to see how Raiders Carve does, though. I don't think that Crew 3 is the most difficult thing to do in this set. There's a lot of 3 power things. And I think that attacking and essentially being able to explore if it's a land card, it can ramp you. Doing that on turn 4 doesn't seem that bad to me. So I want to see how that goes. 4/4 is pretty reasonable stats. So I kind of want to see how this one plays out, but not too high on the vehicles in the set. And last up is the fixing. There's Replicating Ring, which is a snow artifact that adds 1 mana of any color. And then there's Shimmer Drift Veil here, which takes up a common spot. This doesn't go in the land slot like Snow Basics or the Snow Duels. So you'll see this one floating around, but I think this is a good pickup too. Enters the battlefield tapped. When it does enter the battlefield, choose a color, and it taps to add a mana of that chosen color to your mana pool. So I think that's pretty flexible, pretty good as well for colorless. All right, so we went over the colors, the colorless cards. I did want to get into some archetypes. So the second half of this video is going to be the archetypes, and here we go. All right, tokens. First one up. This deck I don't think is real, but I'm ready to be surprised. All right, so it's a go wide deck. Your tokens are going to blank removal, of which there are great ones, because you don't care if your 1/1 token gets blown up, and your opponent doesn't want to do it. And the other thing is it makes tricks better, because when you attack, you're going to attack with a swarm, and your opponent's probably going to be able to eat a couple tokens, or so they think. But if you have tricks in your hand, you're going to be able to kill their creatures, get their blockers out of the way, and then it enables your swarm to attack again the second turn, the turn after, while your opponent's still trying to rebuild. So it does make tricks a little bit more valuable. One of the reasons I don't think this deck is going to be great is because there's 2 different Pyroclasm effects in this set. All right, but let's get into the signpost uncommons. First one is Maja. 2/3, anthems your creatures. Other creatures you control get +1/+1. Amazing, great, love it. It is kind of a fragile body with the amount of instant speed removal. If they take this thing out when you attack with your tokens and then all of a sudden they're all debuffed, that could be a pretty bad game. The second ability is also relevant, though. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get a 1/1 human warrior creature token. And those stick around, of course, even if Maja is out of the way, out of the picture. But it's still there. It becomes a 2/2. And that's really good. There's a blue common that gives all your creatures +2/+1, an inspired charge variant. So I can see some games ending with a Maja and a shit ton of tokens getting anthemed. So pretty cool. All right. Next up is the Saga, which every color pair gets as well. And that's Fall of the Imposter. So I think this is one of the stronger sagas in the game at uncommon. First 2 lore counters that you put on there, first 2 stages, are going to be a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature. Not too impressive, whatever. But the last one, exile a creature with the greatest power among creatures target opponent control. So you get rid of the best creature your opponent has, and it's exiled. It's gone, right? It's not put in the graveyard. So that's very relevant, very strong. You do have to wait a little bit, but it is a pretty cheap saga, so you can play this on turn 3, and then your opponent essentially can't play their best creature on turns 4 and 5 because they want to avoid this. Or you play this late in the game, you can hold off your opponent with your shit ton of tokens, and then eventually snipe their best creature. All right, and then in addition, so you also have each color pairing getting a tap land that you can sack for an effect. Very similar to the sacrifice lands in Dominaria. I see a lot of parallels between this set and Dominaria. Sagas, sack lands, you have the multicolor legendary creatures at uncommon. So each color pairing is going to get one of these. This one is Bredegard Stronghold. I think this is one of the weaker ones, but it is one of the cheaper ones to use. So these cards are going to be auto includes in any deck that has that color pairing. So this one is green, white, sack it, +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures you control. They get Vigilance and Lifelink until end of turn. And Lifelink is very relevant if you're in a racing situation, of course. And those counters don't go away. Plus they get Vigilance, so it's going to enable some attacks that otherwise wouldn't be enabled. And it's on a land, right? So it's free. It's a free effect. When it's useful, great. If it's not, you still got your land. So that's going to be Green's Signpost Uncommons. I did want to get into some role players, though. The first one, anything that makes a token. So Beskir Shieldmaker. When it dies, you get your 1/1 to replace it. It's a fine 2-drop with 2/1 stats, so it's aggressive, getting a couple points of damage. And if it dies, who cares? You get a 1/1 after. So it disincentivizes your opponent to trade with this. Next up, Elderleaf Mentor. It's kind of the same thing, right? 4 mana for a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, though, you get a 1/1 green elf warrior token. More token stuff. Now, if you have your signpost legendary creature Maja, oh, this is a 4/3 and it makes a 2/2. All of a sudden, really, really efficient card. Next up, King Harold's Revenge. Until end of turn, target creature gets +1/+1 for each creature you control and gains trample. Must be blocked this turn if able. 3 mana sorcery. So if you have a shit ton of tokens, you can potentially set up for lethal by swinging with this. You do have to be very careful of instant speed removal, however. But the trample is going to be super relevant on that. And if you can sack your Bredegard Stronghold and give your creature Vigilance and Lifelink, you can potentially gain a bunch of life too and just swing a game totally in your favor with this card. I do think this is a pretty low pick. You should be able to get this 14th, 13th pick out of a pack most times. Last up, Battershield Warrior. Talked about that one a little earlier. But I think this card can be good. The boast cost is 2. Creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. It doesn't say other creatures, so it makes this thing a 3/3 as well when it attacks. Again, there's that push-pull, though, right? So you're spending your mana on this, which means that you're not going to be able to play maybe your 4-drop when you attack with this and boast. But I think late game it can buff up your creatures and potentially enable lethal as well. Presents problems, but it is on a fragile body. You got to watch out for removal on this thing. Okay, up next, Foretell. I think this is going to be one of the stronger decks. One of the things you're going to have to do, though, is get defensive speed. Get something on the battlefield to protect you against those aggressive decks that are going to try to beat you down like that tokens deck, right? And eventually you're just going to beat them with card advantage, drawing a shit ton, using your mana more efficiently with its Foretell stuff. So eventually I think that's how you're going to win, and I think it does it pretty effectively. You can see that with Vega, the Watcher. This card is incredibly strong. It's a 2/2 flyer for 3, which is already fine. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, draw a card. So that's Foretell, right? Because you're casting it from exile. So every Foretell card you cast is a cantrip, draws you a card. It allows you to rifle through your deck, pay less mana because you're paying for the Foretell cost, and you're drawing more and more cards. So I think you just overwhelm your opponent with card advantage with this thing. One of the best of this cycle of legendary signpost uncommon creatures. I think this is going to be a very high pick. Up next is the Saga. Not a huge fan of this Saga. This could read 3 mana, don't do a whole lot. But if you have a shit ton of stuff in being foretold, it can gain you some life, it gives you some mana, and it gets your Foretell card back, right? So if your Augury Raven gets killed, excuse me, this thing can go ahead and get it back, which I think is strong late game. It can be strong in just for that, getting your Foretell card back. In the land, I think this is one of the stronger lands as well. So sacrifice Gates of Istfell, gain 2, draw 2. Having that ability on a land, even though it's overpriced, right? 5 mana plus you have to sack this land. So you couldn't do it until at least turn 6. Unless you had some way of ramping. I think putting that ability on the land makes this card very strong, right? If you draw this late game and maybe you're a little flooded, you're in top deck war with your opponent, your land is going to pull you ahead. So I think that's very strong. So I think this deck, based on the strength of Vega, Gates of Istfell, the Foretell mechanic, can be very strong. But let's look at some role players here. Doomscar Oracle brought this one up earlier. The ability that this has, when you cast your second spell each turn, you gain 2 life, is meant for white-black, but Foretell makes everything super cheap. So you're going to be able to activate this. And since Foretell wants to set up, it's going to take damage early from more aggressive decks. This helps you keep parity, stay alive until your card advantage and your defense and your mana efficiency eventually overwhelms your opponent and you win the game. So I think this is very strong in that type of deck. And it also has Foretell for just a single white mana. Amazing. Depart the Realm. So you can bounce your Sagas with this. It's cheap interaction to get around tricks, save your Vega from removal, which is going to be public enemy number 1 as soon as it hits the field. So I think Depart the Realm is a key role player in this deck. Next up, God's Hall Guardian. We talked about defensive speed. So 6 mana for a Vigilance 3/6. Not so great. We've seen that, I think, in Ikoria. You had a big 3/6 dino with cycling 1 on it. But the fact that you can foretell this and get this out on the battlefield on turn 4 makes this very special. Because that is fast enough for you to stop your opponent's aggro decks in time. Depending on your 6th land and wasting your, well, not wasting, but casting this on turn 6, tapping out for it, that's a tough sell. You know, are you even going to be in a position where this is going to do enough by then? I don't know if you're facing a good aggressive deck. But I think on turn 4, you are in a position to kind of save your own ass. And this thing is 6 toughness. So Bolt isn't going to kill it. Demon Bolt, the Snow one, isn't going to kill it. Tough to get rid of. It also has Vigilance, so it can just start swinging for 3. So I think this card is going to be a key role player in the Foretell deck. Last up, Karfell Harbinger. 1/3 for 2 mana. Not irrelevant, especially with a lot of the 2/1 Berserkers running around in those aggro decks. And then it ramps you. Add a blue mana. Spend it only to foretell a card from your hand or cast an instant or sorcery spell, which you're going to have a ton of in this deck. So it also helps you pay your foretell cards. Yep, and of note, only helps when you foretell the card into exile. It doesn't help you cast it. So got to be aware of that. But I still think it's a very strong card in this deck. All right, up next, Double Spell White-Black. I have some high hopes for this one, but it's built on the strength of its signpost in common here, Furja. It's 5 mana for a 2/4 flying lifelink, which is already fine. That's great. Happy. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand, the rest in your graveyard. So the main problem with this deck is that it runs out of gas, right? When all of your spells are cheap and efficient, you got to keep the fuel ready to trigger your double spell effects. But then you run out of cards. That's where Furja comes into play. The other advantage, I think, in this deck is your recursion. We talked about Master Skald, which I haven't highlighted here, but I think is a key role player. And that brings back an enchantment or aura from the graveyard to your hand. You also have all the raise the Draugrs and stuff like that to get your creatures back, to recast them and trigger Furja, right? To draw you more cards. So I think this is going to be the key. And without this, I think the deck's going to have some problems. Keeping and maintaining the fuel ready to trigger second spell stuff. All right. Next up is the Saga. So, first 2 stages, choose a creature you control. Until next turn, all damage would be dealt to creatures is dealt to this one. So this can enable some attacks. You put this on a token or something. Whatever. Doesn't seem very strong. But the third step, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it's a Zombify effect. It doesn't return to your hand, straight to the battlefield for only 3 mana. And it comes back with a flying counter on it, and it's an Angel Warrior. There's some very minor Angel tribal themes in this set. There's also some minor Warrior stuff going on, maybe, but for the most part, that typing doesn't matter. But the fact that it gets flying is a big game, and it can be any creature in your yard. It can be your Furja, which, you know, double flying. Not a thing, but it doesn't matter because Furja's really strong. So I think that Saga is still pretty decent. It's just not thematically on par, or thematically on the same level with the Orzhov deck here. Next up, Great Hall of Starnheim. I think this card is very strong. This card is awesome. White has the ability to create tokens. It has a bunch of cheap creatures that become irrelevant later in the game. And what you can do for 3 mana and sacrificing your Great Hall, you can make a 4/4 Angel Warrior with Flying and Vigilance. That's insane. You do have to sacrifice a creature, so sometimes, you know, if you don't have any creatures on this board, obviously this ain't going to do much, but it's still land. But this is going to upgrade a creature 99% of the time for you, which is awesome. There's a minor detraction that can only be used anytime you can cast a sorcery, so you can't use it in response to removal, but who cares? You get a Sarah Angel out of it. So I think this card is very strong. One of the best lands. Maybe the best land of the cycle. All right, role players. Doomscar Oracle. We just went over them, but incidental life gain is still good. It helps you win races. I think this deck has great removal, but it can still struggle against those aggro decks because you do want to set up, be able to double spell, those type of things. And this also helps you double spell because its foretell cost is so cheap. So you can foretell this, and then on turn 3, you can play a 2-drop and foretell this for 1 and trigger your effects. So, great. Next up, Infernal Pat. 3 mana for a 2/2. When you cast your second spell each turn, it gets a +1/+1 counter and flying. Eventually, this card can get pretty out of control, right? You can attack with this as a 3/3 flyer on turn 4 if you're able to trigger that. So I think that's very strong. Late game, not a great draw. Gray Ogre, right, is a 3 mana 2/2. Doesn't do a whole lot when you run out of field. All right, Clarion Spirit, I think, is one of the strongest uncommons in white. Probably the top 3, maybe, but it might be the best uncommon in white. When you cast your second spell each turn, you get a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. A 1/1 flyer is not irrelevant, right? And the fact that this is a 2/2 for 2 mana is insane. So I think if you're built to do that, maybe you can get an Anthem effect in white. You can get the Inspired Charge effect. You can swarm your opponent with a bunch of 1/1 white flying creatures. So very strong card, very efficient, and it's a 2/2 for 2 as well. So it's super cheap. Last up, Blood Sky Berserker. Again, not great late game, but if you can drop this on turn 2 and trigger its effect a couple of times, it gets out of control. So if you can double spell on turns 4 and turns 5, this thing can swing as a 5/5 menace, right? Those counters don't go away. So this gets bigger and bigger, and your opponent will eventually have to deal with this. So I think this card can be strong, again, but you have to draw your spells in the right order, which is what kind of worries me about this type of deck. All right, next up, Equipment Aura. I think this deck is real. Lots of Enter the Battle effects are going to be better in this type of deck. Why is that? Well, because your creatures aren't the relevant, their stats aren't as relevant, I should say. Your equipment is going to give them stats. And so when they come in, when they enter the battlefield, if it's a 2/1, it doesn't really matter if you're going to hook it up to an equipment that gives it +3/+3 or something, or put a ruin on it or something, or buff it in some way. What you want to do is get some value from that creature because the stats, it's just used as a tool, essentially, for that equipment to get in the damage. There's also a very strong boast theme in this deck. And by hooking up auras and equipment to your creatures, everything becomes a threat. Your tokens, your 2/1s, your 1/1s, your 2/2s, everything becomes dangerous. And eventually your opponent's just not going to be able to remove this stuff, right? And it doesn't matter if they do, because you just hook up your equipment to the next thing. Next man up, right? All right. First thing, Saga first. All right. So Forging the Tyrite Sword, I think I know I did this. This is the weakest Saga in the series. It's very disjointed. First 2 stages create a treasure token. Okay, what am I doing with treasure? I'm not splashing. I guess it can help me to power out like a stronger card on turn 5. I don't know. Usually these decks are pretty low to the ground and aggressive. So just don't understand why I would waste a slot in my deck for something that's not going to affect the battlefield. The third one is a little bit more relevant, right? You can search your library for an equipment card or a Halvar, God of Battle, which is one of the strongest cards in the set, mythic rare. And if you have one, yeah, I'd probably put a Forging the Tyrite Sword in the deck, I guess. But then you can search your library for an equipment, reveal it, put it into your hand, and that's it. Not too impressed by that. Next up, Guard Armory. This I am impressed by. So 4 mana, sack it. You can search your library for an aura and an equipment card, reveal them, put it into your hand. So you can search your library for Bounding Gold, right? Your removal spell, and your equipment. So fantastic. Love it. Let's do it. Sign me up. And it's on your land. So I think this is a very strong land as well. All right. Now, the reason I left this one for last is because I think this is the strongest or the most nutty effect that I've seen on one of these so far. And that's Cole the Forge Master. It's 2 mana, 2/2. All right. Took me a couple times to really realize the implications of Cole. The last part isn't really relevant. Creature tokens you control that are enchanted or equipped get +1/+1. it fits in with the all creatures become threats thing, which is cool. But the insane part is whenever another non-token creature you control dies, if it was enchanted or equipped, return it to its owner's hand. So there are cheap equipment cards in red, which we'll get to on the next role players slide here, where you can equip something for one, and then it just keeps recurring itself. And this is another reason why Enter the Battlefield effects are so important for this deck, because you can keep playing it over and over. Your opponent has to kill it or they're going to take damage, right? So they got to deal with it, and then it just comes back to your hand over and over again. To have this type of effect at uncommon is crazy. It makes Cole a must-kill creature. That type of effect can run away with the game. If your opponent can't deal with Cole, they're probably going to lose. So I think this card is insane. All right, role players. Ruin of Sustenance. This is probably the best Ruin, I think. But with this cycle, it's an enchant permanent. You can enchant your equipment or your creature, essentially. It automatically replaces itself for 2 mana, so you draw a card. If it's a creature, it has lifelink. If you put it on your equipment, it has equipped creature, has lifelink. So putting this on a Dwarven Hammer, which gets +3/+0, and trample to a creature is pretty big game. And for 2 mana. Oh, and by the way, if you have Cole out and you put this on whatever junk creature you have, all of a sudden that creature has lifelink, and if it dies, it comes back to your hand. Awesome. Love it. Ruined Crown. We talked about this. I think this card is special. I think this card is a reason to draft these runes. So, 3 mana equipment. When it enters the battlefield, search your library, hand, your graveyard, even, for a ruin card. Put it onto the battlefield attached to ruin ground, and it gives the equipped creature +1/+1. So all of a sudden, now if you have a Rune of Sustenance somewhere, it's gonna make this equipment give an equipped creature +1/+1 and lifelink, which is good for an equipped cost of 2. That's great. You can't race that. So I think that's awesome. I think this card is going to be really sweet. Dwarven Hammer. I wanted to talk about this equipment. Putting a Rune of Sustenance on this thing is beast mode. So this is the part of the cycle of equipment that generates a creature. There's one in black, white, and red. When this enters the battlefield, you may pay 2. You're always, I think, going to pay that extra 2 for this. If you do, create a 2/1 red dwarf berserker creature token and attach Dwarven Hammer to it. That makes that Dwarven Berserker little token into a threat, right? It's a 5/1 trample. Gotta deal with it. If I put a Rune of Sustenance on the Dwarven Hammer, now it's a 5/1 trample lifelink, and so what? They kill the token. I'm going to just equip this to my next creature, and all of a sudden that creature is now a threat with lifelink and trample. Crazy. All right, last up is Raven Wings. I'm excited about this one also because it makes your creature evasive, which is what red-white tends to struggle with. Once your opponent stabilizes, it's hard for them to get back, right? They need an Anthem effect, an Inspired Charge effect, or they need some way to evade the opponent, and that's what Raven Wings does. +1/+0 flying. The bird thing isn't relevant. Who cares if they're a bird? I'm a bird. Everything's a bird. Birds aren't real. Whatever. So put a Ruin on this. This card becomes amazing, right? There's the red Rune of Speed, which is +1/+0 in haste. +2/+0 haste flying on an equipment with an equip cost of 2. Really good. I think it's even better if it's +1/+0 flying and lifelink. So that makes that almost impossible to race. So I think this card is going to be sneaky good in this deck. Next up, Ramp and Splash. This is going to be red-green Gruul. And I put Teamer Works together here, and that means that I think a blue splash is going to be very common. This is the splash deck. Red has a shit ton of treasure tokens, which you can tap and sack to generate 1 mana of any color, and then green, of course, is splashy, as it always is. And then you ramp to your fatties. There's a couple good fatties in the set, a few good fatties here, and then there's a lot of snow synergies between in green, and especially if you're splashing for those blue cards as well. So, let's get into it. Svella is going to be your uncommon signpost legendary creature. 2/4 for 3. Create a colorless snow artifact token named Icy Manolith with tap, add 1 mana of any color. Not too exciting, but you can do this over and over again. Ramp yourself. This is a snow artifact token. Counts as a snow permanent. Produces snow mana. right? Think of that Icehide Troll and how out of control that can get in this type of deck. And then the second ability gets a little crazy. Please note, this can be done at instant speed, but 8 mana tap this card. Big cost, I get it. But look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may cast a spell from among them without paying its mana cost, but the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. This means it just essentially draws and plays you a card from your library at instant speed, over and over and over again. So at this point, this card becomes something that must be dealt with. But it has 4 toughness, so it can stick around. It's decently statted for 3 mana. So I think this card is strong if you can last to that end game. Also, it can cast any spell, right? Any color. Doesn't matter what your mana is. But at that point, I mean, you're going to have a shit ton of Icy Mana lists sitting around, so you're going to be able to play anything anyway. All right. I think this is the best 2 mana Saga in the set. So let's look at this one. 2 mana, red-green, Arnie slays the troll. First step, target creature you control fights 1 creature you don't. So already decent. Step 2, add a red mana, irrelevant, whatever. 2 mana, put 2 +1/+1 counters on up to 1 target creature you control. So now you're buffing your creature. Already I'm in. Okay, already this card is very good and efficient for 2 mana. Step 3, gain life equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. So this helps you stay alive and beat those aggro decks. And this can be used early, or it can be done, on turn 4, you play a 2-drop, and you can play this. You can double spell with this. You can play this on turn 3 after you play your 2-drop. If it beats theirs, you can have a fight, kill theirs, their 2-drop, whatever. Then you can grow that thing, so it becomes a difficult, a real problem, and then you can gain a bunch of life in case they're aggro. So I think this Saga is very strong, very flexible, kind of all over the place, but I think it's very efficient for what it does. Last up, Not Vold Slumber Mound. This one is pretty hard to use. It's 6 mana and the card, so you need 7 mana total. If you have a Svella in play, probably not a big deal, but otherwise it might be kind of an issue. But it does create a 4/4 green troll warrior creature token with trample, so it has evasion. 4/4 is with trample is good at any point in the game. So late game, this is a good top deck. Early game, it's a land, so you're just never going to cut this card. I think this card is just fine. Red-green tends to have big bodies running around, but getting one out of your land for nothing? Sign me up. I'm in. So I think that card's very strong. All right, role players. Crush the Weak. So we talked about some of it takes time for them to set up, get their mana going, produce their mana, get their splash color. So Crush the Weak, I think, is going to be very important for this deck, and also for the red-blue Giants deck. But this is one of the Pyroclasm, one of the 2 Pyroclasm effects in the set. 2 damage to any creature. If a creature dealt damage, this way would die, exile it instead. So it gets exiled, so they can't even get it back. So I think that's very strong. And it has a foretell cost of 1. Super cheap, super efficient. You can just bank this one for later. You can foretell this on 2, let your opponent dig their grave a little bit deeper, and then just spring it out on turn 4 or 5 for 1 mana, and then play your 4-drop after. Very, very strong card. Next up, Glittering Frost. This is the splash part of it as well, and you're also ramping, right? 3 mana, snow enchantment, so this counts as a snow permanent. Makes your land into snow, so that's your 2nd snow permanent for this 1 spell. And it whenever enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional 1 mana of any color. Since it's coming from a snow land, it counts as snow as well. So it counts as 2 snow mana. So very good, splashy, fixy, adds to snow permanent, works with what the deck wants to do. Next up, Seize the Spoils. This is, again, it's a splash card, right? You're drawing 2, creating a treasure token to help ramp you later. It's 3 mana. You do have to discard a card for this, but I don't think that's as relevant, especially when there's creatures and there's cards that require you to exile a creature card from your graveyard to have an extra effect. You can discard a land, whatever you need. Late game, you'll probably be holding on to a land in your hand as well, and this just allows you to draw 2 cards. It's nothing super special, but it does allow you to splash. It allows you to ramp for 1 turn with that treasure token, so I think it's strong in that regard. And a good role player for this type of deck. that wants to splash. And we talked about Spirit of the Alder Guard before, but this is just such a strong role player in this deck. We had to bring this one up again. Like we said, it goes and finds your splash color, your snow land, and then it gets to be an out-of-control threat. Each other snow permanent, keep in mind how that works with Svella making Icy Manaless. Or Glittering Frost here. If you Glittering Frost a land, a basic land, you have 2 snow permanents, this one searches up a third, this thing's going to come down as a 3/4 and fetch a land. Great efficient card for what it does. All right, next up, Berserker. I think this is going to be the aggro deck of the format, and that's because it has reach. So this excels in racing situations. It has a lot of ability to give its creatures menace or make its creatures hard to block, force you to attack, which we'll see. And then it has reach to finish out a game. So just when you think you've stabilized, this thing can reach over and kill you for that last 6 points of damage, and we'll discuss how. First way how is going to be Carter, which I think is, again, one of the very, very strongest of this legendary cycle. It's 4 mana, 4/3, so it already has great stats. Right? When it enters the battlefield, it forces your opponent's creatures to attack you each combat until your next turn. So it forces your opponent's creatures to attack you. Hopefully you can set up some unfavorable blocks and trades and stuff, but no matter what, it's going to enable your attack the turn after, right? Because all your opponent's creatures are going to be tapped. So it allows you to swing back for lethal in many cases. Another thing, whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses 1 and you gain 1. So you drain your opponent. So every creature your opponent dies in that situation is going to drain them further. And when you crack back, if your attacking creatures die, they still lose life. So that's more reach for you just from 1 card. So I think this is incredibly powerful for 4 mana here. Next up, Carter's Vicious Return. Another very strong Saga. It doesn't so much fit with the theme, but it does have good reach. So 4 mana, stage 1. Sack a creature. When you do, this deals 3 damage to any target, including face. Okay, so that's 3 damage to your opponent right there. Stage 2, each player discards a card. Whatever. Not so great. Number 3, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gets a +1/+1 counter and haste. So you can get your Carter back. You can get whatever you sacrifice back. You can get your best creature back. So it's a zombify effect for 4, and it puts a +1/+1 counter and haste, which is efficient and good just in and of itself for 4 mana. But you're also getting to Lightning Bolt with this spell as well. So I think that's very strong, and it gives this deck more reach. The next card up, Emmersterm Skullcairn, my vote for best name ever, and really metal artwork. 4 mana, tap this, sack it, deals 3 damage to target player. That player discards a card. I don't think the discarding is going to be super relevant most times, but it can get that last card out of your opponent's hand, sure. But this gives you even more reach. Just these 3 cards alone, I think you're going to get 9-10 points of reach out of them. So this deck has the potential to really blow up that foretell or setup deck. This is when we talked about setup or go nuts, this is the go nuts part, right? And this is all nuts. So I think this deck, when it comes together, is going to be brutal and scary to face off against. All right, let's look at some role players. First up, Death Knell Berserker, 2 mana for a 2/2. If it dies, or when it dies, if its power was 3 or greater, create a 2/2 zombie Berserker. So I think what you'll see with some of these other role players here is that you're able to buff your creatures by a little bit for attacks. Give them +1/+0 in haste. There's equipment, cheap equipment that you can use as well. So you can trigger this somewhat reliably and get your value out of it for a 2/2 for 2. So I think it can be strong in this deck. Case in point, Doomscar Titan. 6 mana for a 4/4, but with a foretell cost of 5. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. Also a great target to get back from the graveyard with your Rakdos Saga, right? Bringing this back, buffing your creatures up again, and swinging in for the win. Next, another effect, Karfell Kennel Master. Two target creatures get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until the end of turn. Yes, Death Knell Berserker would be a 3/2, but it's not going to die. So this enables free attacks for you, and it leaves behind a 4/4 body, which is relevant. So this is again kind of more reach, because your opponent, unless they can just bounce something, which is not likely against this deck, and two creatures, they're going to take more damage. So I think this is an awesome role player in this deck for getting those few final points of damage across. Lastly is Run Amok. This is the red trick. So using this on your Death Knell Berserker in a trading situation is great, because you're going to bleed over your trample damage. This is 2 mana for an instant speed. Target attacking creature gets +3/+3 and trample until end of turn. You can kill your opponent out of nowhere, right? You're swinging with your Doomscar Titan. Your opponent's in a chumping situation. They're going to chump with their token. They're 1/1. All of a sudden, you make that thing a 7/7 trample. Now they take the last 6 points of damage and they're dead. So I think that's going to be a key card in this Rakdos Turn 'em Sideways Go Nuts deck. Next up, Giants. I think this has some of the most powerful synergy in the format. It revolves around instants and sorceries, having a giant or a wizard on the battlefield. And this one is one of the slower decks. We talked about those pyroclasm effects. This deck's going to want to use those. So it's Foretell and Fatties bringing out those big giants. First up, speaking of fatties, 3 mana. Not what I would consider a fatty, but look at this thing. 3 mana for a 3/3. Giant Wizard. Whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess damage, if a giant wizard or spell you controlled dealt damage to it this turn, draw a card. So that's instants and sorceries as well. So if this Agar the Freezing Flame runs over their 2/2, because it has 3 power, it'll also draw you a card. A lot of your removal, think Demon Bolt, 4 damage. Squash, 6 damage, is going to deal excess damage when you kill a creature with it. That's now going to turn into a cantrip. This card is a must deal with situation when this hits the battlefield. But it's reasonably statted at a 3/3 for 3. So it's a fantastic legendary signpost. Up next is a 2 mana Saga. Not as impressed with this one, because it doesn't do it doesn't help you get parity. It doesn't help you catch up, right? It doesn't do a whole lot for 2 mana. So the first thing it does is scry 2, which is fine. Doesn't affect the board. Fine. Helps tailor your draws. Second stage, draw a card. Okay, I'm listening. You can then reveal a giant card from your hand. When you do, it deals 2 damage to an opponent or planeswalker. Not a big deal. At the time you're going to play this card, that 2 damage probably isn't going to matter a whole lot. The last thing, next giant spell you cast this turn costs 2 less to cast. Now this can be relevant. So if you scry up, a 6-drop giant, and you play this on turn 2, now it's turn 4, you can play your 6-drop giant as a 4 mana spell. So that can be relevant. But it takes some setup and some luck to get there. So I'm not as impressed with that Saga. What I am impressed with is Surtland Frostfire, another card in the running for coolest name. 5 mana, sack it, scry 2. Okay, not so great, but deals 2 damage to each creature. So this is a Pyroclasm effect. It does come late in the game, so the earliest you can cast this, unless you ramp, is going to be turn 6, right? Because it's 5 mana and sacking this land. In addition, there's some push-pull because a lot of your creatures are more mana intensive, right? So you're going to generally want that 6 land, but if it keeps you alive and kills all your opponent's tokens and blows up their whole aggro deck for the cost of a land, that's fantastic. So I do think this card is going to be great in this deck. All right. Let's go over some role players. Frostpire Arcanist, 5 mana, but it does cost 1 less if you control a giant or a wizard. So it becomes 4 mana, 2/5, which is just fine. Great defensive creature. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for an instant or sorcery card with the same name as a card in your graveyard. Reveal it, put it into your hand shelf of your library. So this is going to be effective with, you have your Demon Bolt, you have your Draw 2, Scry 2, any instant or sorcery that you have multiples of that you've already cast, and it's in your graveyard. This can go fetch another one for you. So I think when it does the thing, it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be awesome. But sometimes you're just going to have to cast this as a 2/5 for 4. something like that. 2/5 for 5, hopefully not, just to stay alive. But I do think it's going to serve as a really good role player in this type of deck. Next up, Assault Ravager. Talked about this one before. Is Red's Mythic Uncommon, but deals X damage to any target. You already have a ton of Giants and Wizards. Blue has access to a ton of Changelings as well. So there's a real possibility this can nug your opponent for 5 and kill him, or it can just blow up a creature. Even by itself, if you have no other Giants or Wizards on the field, it still deals 1 to anything. So it can still pick off a 2/1 or something. And then it also has 4 power, so it's going to trade. It's going to, most of the time it'll trade down because of 2 toughness. But if it's on blocks, you can trade up with it, killer 4/4, something like that. So good card, very good card. Glimpse the Cosmos. Talked about this one as well. 2 mana. The effect isn't great if that's all the effect was. Top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them in your hand, rest in the bottom. But if you control a giant, you can pay 1 and do it again. So I think that's incredible. Look, you've drawn 2 for 3 mana, but you get to essentially scry 6, right? With this card. So that's just a fantastic rate for this type of effect. And then it recurs itself. You can use the second half of it whenever you want. So fantastic if you're in the Giants deck. Last up, we have Squash. If you're in the Giants deck, this is a no-brainer. This becomes the best removal spell in your deck. 6 damage to creature or planeswalker. If you have your Signpost Uncommon creature, Agar or whatever he's called, this is going to draw you a card too. So just a fantastic card for super cheap. 2 mana at instant speed. Blow up their best creature. Sounds good to me. So I think this deck's going to be strong if you can get those Pyroclasm effects in it and survive long enough to set up and hold board parity where you're not too far behind that you can't just recover. So next up, Draugr. This is blue-black. This deck I think is the least focused of the deck, but it does have some. It's just built around strong cards. Blue and black are very strong colors, and they're very control-y, and you can recur your shit, grind your opponents into the dirt, and kill them on card advantage. There's also a snow theme, and it has what I think is the best uncommon in this set, and that's going to be Narfi Betrayer King. 5 mana for a 4/3. It anthems all your other snow and zombie creatures, right? They all get +1/+1. 3 snow mana. Return this from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So you have to exile this thing or it will never die. And it's a 4/3. So you have to be able to deal with this. There's nothing that's going to be able to block this profitably, right? There's not a lot of 5 toughness stuff. And if there is, you're in blue-black and you can probably get rid of it. So this card will end so many games. It's going to be so frustrating to see on the other side of the battlefield for so many other decks. You have to deal with this card. It's just so strong. The fact that it anthems all your other creatures in this type of deck is just ridiculous. Your changelings, your zombies, your snow creatures. This card reads like a bomb rare, not an uncommon. So I just... this presents so many problems if you're able to pull one of these and play it. So, fantastic legendary uncommon signpost creature for this archetype. Next up, Trickster God's Heist. This is not very focused on what Dimir wants to do in this set, but it's 4 mana, switcheroo, which is already good, right? You trade your worst creature for their best creatures. Their best creature. And then the second stage, you may exchange control of 2 target non-basic, non-creature permanents that share card types. So the reason they say non-basic is because they don't want you to exchange for a basic land. They don't like to kill basic lands. WotC Wizards does not like to do that. And then non-creature. So that means you can exchange this. You can exchange your Trickster God's Heist for their Icy Manipulator or whatever the hell they got over on their side of the field that you want. Their equipment. And then this thing's going to die. Stage 3, target player loses 3 and you gain 3. So it drains for 3, which, may or may not be relevant. Who knows? Not a whole lot to say about this. Doesn't really fit in the theme, but it is very strong. I think it is very strong. This is the control magic of the set, and so you can steal their best thing. Ain't nothing wrong with that. All right. Port of Karfell. This is one of the weaker lands, and it's so expensive for this type of effect. It's 6 mana and tap this, so 7 mana total. Mill 4 cards of your own. Then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Now, you're never going to turn this card down. I think it's still very strong, but the effect you're getting isn't the strongest of this cycle that we've seen. Still very strong overall, though, for what you're doing. You get your best card out of the graveyard, so that's awesome. To get out of your land, fantastic. Sign me up. All right, role players. Pilfering Hawk. So snow permanent. It tap a snow land, draw and discard. With all the awesome recursive stuff in black, I think you can discard creature cards. You count on getting them back later. You can discard your Narfi and maybe get that back for cheap instead of having to pay 5 mana for that thing. And then Narfi also buffs the Pilfering Hawk to a 2/3. So this is your looter of the set, and I think it's a pretty good one, especially if you're in if you have between 6 or more snowlands. Turgrid's Shadow, again, recursion in this set. This is a very powerful effect at instant speed, of course, which is to note you usually don't see this type of effect at instant speed. But each player sacrifices 2 creatures for cost of 4. But a base cost of 5. To me, this doesn't matter if I foretell it or cast it for its 5 mana cost. You can set up pretty well with this, being blue-black control. A lot of your creatures are more expensive, you're slower, you're foretelling, so you wait till your opponent has 2 creatures out. Maybe you don't have anything out, and you just make them nug both their creatures. Sounds good to me, right? Picking off a 3 and a 4 drop with this or something. Or if your Narfi's on the field or you have Raise the Draugr in your hand, it doesn't matter what you sacrifice then because you just get it back. So I think this is going to be a strong role player in this control deck. Saw it coming. Again, we're in control. So 3 mana. This is a cancel with upside. Cancel is already playable and limited, not great. Maybe a C- level. But the foretell cost of 2 makes this very strong. If they were going to try to exile your Narfi with Feed the Serpent or Raven Form or something, you can counter that spell for super cheap. And then they'll probably concede after that because Narfi is a must-deal-with threat. Last up, Priest of the Haunted Edge. And I kind of waffled on this. I think this is the only deck where this card can be good because you can recur this thing and you have a lot of snow. But it's a 2-mana zombie cleric, snow. It's an 0/4, and you can sack it. Target creature gets -X until the end of turn, where X is the number of snow lands you control. So now snow permanents. I think if this was snow permanents, it would be very good. Well, not very good, but pretty good. So you would only generally want to include this in your deck if you had 7, 8 plus snow lands, because you'd want 3 or 4 of them to make this thing worth it. But you can make it worth it, and you can recur this thing with Raise the Draugr, where you're getting this back plus another card, right? Then all of a sudden this becomes a removal spell you can use again and again, and that's pretty good. That's pretty damn good. All right. Green-blue Snow Changeling. So this is, as Simic usually is, more of a synergy enabler type deck. So this enables all your tribes. So you have a ton of changelings. You can splash. They get benefits from Narfi, for example, if you want to splash for Sultai. If you have anything that benefits Berserkers or Elves or you name it, all your changelings are going to get that effect too. So this really allows you to pick and choose from those enablers in the set that care about tribal stuff. Put them all in your deck and make your changelings into huge threats. It also has a lot of synergy with snow, of course. Blue and green are both heavy into snow. So more I'm not going to be able to say that. Morit of the Frost. It's a 5-mana clone, which is kind of expensive, but it can copy any permanent. So it can copy your Icy, whatever you want. Usually you're going to copy a creature, your best creature, and then when it does copy that creature, it gets +2, +1/+1 counters on it. And it's a changeling, of course. So you have your Augury Raven out, which is a 3/3 flyer. Next turn, you cast Morit of the Frost, and this is a 5/5 flyer for 5. Pretty damn good. Pretty good with blue's evasive creatures. And if you have some stuff that cares about tribes, this becomes even better, right? Makes Raise the Draugr really good in this deck because it's guaranteed to get you back 2 creatures because they're changeling. All right, 3 Seasons. I like this card quite a bit. I think this is also a very, very strong 2-mana Saga. So first stage, not great. Mill 3 cards. Okay, not really a benefit. Second stage, return up to 2 target snow permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. 2 mana for that effect is very good, as we've discussed with Raise the Draugr. This one gets back your snow lands, artifacts. It's a snow aura. I don't even know. I think there's that Glittering Frost card. And then, of course, any snow creatures that you have. Awesome. Last stage, totally irrelevant. Don't care. Choose 3 cards in each graveyard. Their owners shuffle those cards into their libraries. Maybe there's an off chance that there's a Narfi your opponent couldn't get back into the battlefield in time because they didn't draw their 3rd snow land or something, and you can get rid of that, put it back in the library, but usually it's probably not great. There's not a strong mill theme in this set, so. All right. Lit Jara, Mirror Lake. That's a mouthful. So this is a good land too. 5 mana, same CMC as Morit, but of course you also have to sack this land as well. But you create a clone. Has to be a creature you control, not any creature, but it does enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. So it becomes stronger. Makes you can copy your Augury Raven, make it a 4/4. So 4/4 flyer for 6 mana. Pretty good utility out of the land. So fantastic card, almost always relevant. There's a very rare stage where this is going to be a bad top deck, and there's nothing you're going to want to clone and make stronger. So very good land. Role players. Mistwalker, love this card. 3 mana for a 1/4 changeling flyer that pumps itself. So this is going to benefit all of your tribal synergies. It can be a threat in the air late game, or you can make it a 3/2 flyer or 4/1 flyer. It's starting to nug them. And then it's a big butt wall while you're setting up your stuff. So I think this card's awesome. Very high pick for me. Blizzard Brawl, we talked about snow synergy. So this is a 1 mana Prey Upon, right? Fight spell, but if you control 3 or more snow permanents, so lands, creatures, whatever, the creature you control gets +1/+0 and indestructible until end of turn. Then they fight. So this allows you to pick off creatures with Death Touch, punch above your weight class, and then not trade during the fights. But one thing to be aware of with these fight effects in this set, or any sorcery, is that there's a lot of instant speed removal. So you got to be careful when you use it. But for 1 mana, you can't get better than that. Super cheap effect. Bind the Monster. This is the other blue removal spell. They have Raven form and Bind the Monster. So with a deck like this, this just helps to prevent folks from getting underneath you while you set up and bring your changelings online and get your synergies going. Blue-green also needs cheap interaction. They need it because red, black, and white tend to get all the removal. So Bind the Monster, what makes blue so good this set is because it does have access to that removal. And this taps a creature, and it doesn't untap during its untap step. All for the cheap price of 1 blue mana. Super cheap. The downside is that it does deal damage to you equal to its power. So late game, if you're in a racing situation, maybe you don't want to use this, or if you're at less than 3 life or something, not going to be very good. But I think in many cases, early game, when you need to stop something that's annoying you, it's going to do the job. It's going to do it cheap and allow you to play something else that turn. So good card. Would want 1 or 2 of those in the type of deck like this. Last up, Mass Vandal. More cheap interaction, right? 2 mana, 1/3 changeling. So it's going to work with all your tribal stuff, but not great stats for 2 mana. The difference is, when it enters the battlefield, you can exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, exile target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. So this is going to get rid of those sagas. Going to get rid of any vehicles your opponents have. Their Icy Manipulator. It's going to get rid of any equipment or Bound in Gold or whatever they got. They're Bind the Monster. So I think there's enough utility here that this makes this something that you can include in your blue-green decks. It's got the Changeling Tribal. It's a 2-mana 1/3 if you're desperate, but it has that utility, and I think its ability is relevant enough at the time that you're going to want one of these in just about any green deck, but especially green-blue, where you need that interaction to allow your superior synergy to go over the top and your card advantage to go over the top in the late game. Last up, this is the last stop on the train. All right, folks, we did it. Elves. So I'm excited about this deck too. I'm interested to see how this one plays out with all the pyroclasms and stuff in the set, because this is a swarm deck. Okay, you're gonna have a lot of little elf creature tokens running around, 2 toughness, 1 toughness, little things that can get blown up by a pyroclasm. But it has a lot of synergy. There's a lot of really good synergy within this Elves deck. And it has, I think, the best sacrifice outlets because of the tokens, because you're in black, where you have access to village rights and stuff like that. It has good creatures, a lot of creatures with enter the battlefield effects. So I think it doesn't care about its creatures, which is good, because you can sacrifice them, and then you can they add up to a greater sum of their parts, right? All right, so let's get into the uncommons, the signposts. So Herald, King of Skemfar, 3 mana for a 3/2 menace. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You can reveal an elf, a warrior, or Tyvar. Tyvar is the mythic planeswalker in the set, so we're not going to be concerned with that. But it is going to tutor up another elf or warrior card. If you're a dedicated Elves deck, this is going to hit more often than not. And a 3/2 menace for 3 mana is already just a fine card. So I think this card is decent. It's an auto-include. It's fine. It doesn't blow the doors off like a Narfi would, but it's still a very good card, and your opponent's going to be hesitant to remove it because it's already done good work just by its enter the battlefield effect. So I think that card is very strong. Good role player in this deck. Next up, Binding the Old Gods. This is one of the strongest of the sagas, right? Stage 1, it comes down and just nugs a non-land permanent. So their creature or anything that's bothering you, artifact, enchantment, equipment, whatever it is, it blows it up. Stage 1. Fantastic. Love it. Stages 2 and 3, not as good, but there is some synergies here. So stage 2, search a library for a forest card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, shuffle your library. So it does ramp you here. Granted, this is going to be turn 5 when it does that, so maybe not the most relevant, but it can get a snow dual land. The snow dual lands in this set would be like Forest Plains or Forest Swamp or whatever, so it can get your splash card. It can also just get your snow basic, so it can help you find your snow stuff, which is good. Stage 3, creatures you control gain Death Touch until end of turn. So this can enable some attacks, but I don't think it's particularly relevant. I think it would be a lot different if it was creatures you control gain Death Touch until the end of your opponent's next turn or something like that, right? Because then they couldn't attack into you. But it does enable some attacks. You can swing with your tokens. Your opponent's not going to block because why would they trade their real creatures for your 1/1 little tokens? If you have menace and stuff, it also becomes good because then your opponent would have to trade 2 things, which they wouldn't want to do. So maybe this gets across the last few points of damage for you too. Last up, Skemfar Elderhall. Not as impressed with this land either, but it does feed into the themes, which makes me think it's going to play better than it looks. But 5 mana, sack this. 1 creature you don't control gets -2/-2 until end of turn. So 2 toughness. The earliest you can use this is turn 6 unless you ramp. It's going to kill something, but maybe who cares? -2/-2 isn't that big of a deal at that stage in the game. If it was dealing it to every creature, that would be different, like a pyroclasm effect. But yeah, it's kind of a minor effect there. The other half, though, is create 2 1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens. And this, we're going to talk about this when we get into the role players for this, but this has the most intriguing role player, I think, in the set. So that is going to be relevant. Having a critical mass of elves on the field, or your tribe on the field. So let's get into the role players. Right here, Skemfar Shadow Sage. So what we've seen here is that we're creating elves. We're making more. Your Herald of Skemfar, legendary dude. He's an elf, and he's finding another elf. So that's 2 elves. You sack your land, you get 2 more. Now you have 4 elves. This thing comes down. This is your 5th elf. And then its effects are each opponent can lose X life, where X is the greatest number of creatures you control that have a creature type in common. Keep in mind, this also works with any of your green changelings that you may have on the field. The other options, you can gain X. You can either kill your opponent if you're in a position to do that, or you can help in the race, right? If you're dying for whatever reason, you can gain X life and survive another turn. And it comes attached with a 2/5 body, which is not irrelevant. That is a big ass on a 4-drop in black. So I think this card is very intriguing to me, and I think it's going to end a lot of games. And there's a couple reasons why that we're going to get into with these role players. So next up, let's talk about more elves. So this equipment I think is good. 3 mana. You get a 1/1 elf warrior creature token, attach elven bow to it. Equip creature gets +1/+2 and has reach. So it's a 2/3 reach for 3 mana. It has an equip cost of 3, which is a little high for this effect. But +1/+2 and reach is not irrelevant. All right, reach is going to be important in black-green, in Golgari, because your main threat is going to be flyers going over the top of your tokens and shit like that. So this is going to help you out with that. So I think this card is going to be a very important role player. It's also going to add your elf count. Next up, Return Upon the Tide. So this is Skemfar Shadow Sage. Let's say it dies. You sacrifice it to village rights or whatever. You can get it back with Return Upon the Tide. 5 mana, return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. If it's an elf, create 2 more green elf warrior creature tokens. So let's say now we've sacked our land, we've cast our uncommon spell. So we have 4 elves. Skemfar Shadow Sage is 5. We cast Elven Bow, that's 6. We sack our Shadow Sage, then we return it with Return Upon the Tide. We create 2 more elf tokens, and now we're draining, we're nugging our opponent for 8 damage. That's going to kill them at this point. At this point, Skemfar Shadow Sage has dealt 14 damage to our opponent. Lastly, Roots of Wisdom. At common, 2 mana. Mill 3 cards, then return to land or an elf card from your graveyard to your hand if you can't draw a card. So let's say Skemfar Shadow Sage, you sack it again. You can bring it back again with Roots of Wisdom and then finish off your opponent. So I think that's why this Shadow Sage is a real key, and I'm really interested to see how that plays out in this set. All right, that's going to be it for me. Thank you all for watching. Let me know if you have questions or comments in the YouTube video. Thanks so much.